In the shadowy corridors of London's Hargrave Museum, an ancient curse awakens as the unopened sarcophagus of a lost Egyptian princess is revealed. Museum owner Charles Hargrave and his team are plunged into a nightmarish realm where dreams and reality blur. Each night brings haunting visions of being trapped in a spectral burial chamber, haunted by the mummified princess seeking to claim their souls. As team members start to mysteriously die, Charles must race against time to uncover the secrets of the hieroglyphs and break the curse. With suspenseful twists, chilling encounters, and a battle against an ancient force, this tale of terror and desperation will leave you on the edge of your seat, wondering who will survive the curse of the princess. Dive into this gothic horror story where the past's deadliest secrets are unearthed and survival hangs in the balance. Chapter 1. The Arrival. In the heart of London, under the grey, brooding sky, the Hargrave Museum stood, like a sentinel guarding the relics of the past. Its stone facade, weathered by time, whispered tales of forgotten eras and lost civilizations. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old books and ancient artifacts. The museum, a labyrinth of history, was the life's work of Charles Hargrave, its enigmatic owner. On this particular morning, an air of excitement buzzed through the corridors of the museum. Today, a new exhibit was to arrive, one that had caused a stir in the academic world, an unopened Egyptian sarcophagus, rumoured to hold the remains of a lost princess. The whispers of her story had travelled across continents, from the dusty dunes of Egypt to the cobbled streets of London, igniting imaginations and curiosity. Charles stood in the main hall, his eyes reflecting the gleam of anticipation. He was a man of medium build, with a countenance that bore the marks of countless hours poring over ancient texts and artifacts. His hair, once as black as the raven, now showed streaks of silver, and his hands were etched with the fine lines of meticulous work. The sound of heavy wheels and the clatter of hooves announced the arrival of the sarcophagus. Charles hurried outside, where a horse-drawn carriage stood, draped in heavy canvas. The delivery men, gruff and weather-beaten, carefully maneuvered the large crate down the ramp. It thudded heavily onto the cobblestones, sending a shiver through Charles's spine. With great care, the crate was brought into the museum and placed in the centre of the main hall. The air was thick with dust and expectation as Charles signed the delivery papers, with a hand that trembled slightly, not from age, but from excitement. As the delivery men departed, Charles stood alone with the crate. The museum was silent, save for the faint echo of London's hustle and bustle outside. He circled the crate, his eyes tracing the ancient hieroglyphs that adorned its sides. The symbols spoke of royalty, of the afterlife, and of curses, the usual fare of ancient Egyptian tombs. But there was something else, a sense of urgency, almost as if the hieroglyphs were trying to convey a warning. With a deep breath, Charles signalled his assistants to begin the process of opening the crate. The sound of prying wood filled the hall, each creak and crack resonating like a chord of ominous music. Slowly, the sarcophagus was revealed, a magnificent piece of ancient craftsmanship, adorned with gold and lapis lazuli, the face of the sarcophagus carved in the serene, enigmatic visage of the princess. Charles couldn't tear his eyes away from it. The princess's face, though carved in stone, seemed to possess a life of its own, her eyes gazing into the distance, her expression one of eternal slumber. There was a beauty to it, but also a profound sadness, as if she had been robbed of her destiny. As the last rays of the afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the hall, Charles knew that this sarcophagus was more than just another exhibit. It was a portal to a past that was shrouded in mystery and legend, Little did he know that it would soon become a gateway to a realm beyond his wildest imaginations. A realm where the boundaries between the living and the dead, the real and the surreal, would blur into obscurity. That night, as the moon cast its pale light over London, Charles left the museum with a sense of unease he couldn't shake off. The sarcophagus had been unveiled, and with it, something ancient and restless had been awakened. Ah, my dear nocturnal scholars of the macabre. It's time for a quick scare break. As we linger in these shadowy realms, a small favour I dare to ask. If my tales of terror bring you thrills, do not let our journey end here. Hit like, subscribe, and join our dark congregation. Now shall we delve deeper into the abyss. Let's embrace the darkness once more. Let's get back to the shadows. Chapter 2. Shadows in the Dark. The night had fallen heavily over the city, draping everything in a cloak of darkness. In his quaint home, nestled in the heart of London, Charles Hargrave tossed and turned in his bed, his mind unable to escape the haunting image of the Egyptian princess's sarcophagus. The excitement of the day had given way to a restless unease, an ominous prelude to the night's descent into a world of shadows. As sleep finally claimed him, Charles found himself in the throes of a vivid dream. He was locked inside the sarcophagus, his body rigid and confined within the ancient casket. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, each second an eternity, as he lay there in the suffocating darkness. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of ancient spices and death. He could feel the weight of centuries pressing down on him, the silence of the tomb a deafening roar in his ears. Then, suddenly, the lid of the sarcophagus was open from the outside. Light flooded in, blinding and disorienting him. With great effort, Charles pushed himself out of the sarcophagus, his limbs heavy and uncooperative. He found himself in a burial chamber, but it was unlike any he had seen before. The walls were adorned with hieroglyphs and paintings, but they seemed to shimmer and shift as if not quite real. The chamber felt confined to its four walls, beyond which nothing seemed to exist, like a ghostly replica of a burial chamber suspended in an abyss. As he regained his composure, Charles noticed a doorway in the far wall. It was dark and foreboding, an invitation to the unknown. His heart pounded in his chest as he took a step towards it. That's when he heard it. A shuffling noise, like the sound of someone dragging their feet across stone. The noise grew steadily closer, echoing through the chamber, sending chills down Charles's spine. He stood frozen, his eyes fixed on the doorway, as the shuffling grew louder, closer. His mind raced with fear and curiosity, wondering what spectre from the past was approaching. But just as the entity seemed about to emerge, Charles was jolted awake by the shrill cry of a night bird outside his window. The next morning, Charles returned to the museum, his mind still haunted by the dream. As he walked through the halls, he noticed a peculiar atmosphere among his staff. They all seemed unusually tired, their eyes shadowed and their movements sluggish. One by one, they confided in Charles, their voices low and tinged with unease. Each of them had experienced disturbing dreams the previous night, dreams that left them feeling drained and anxious. The realization hit Charles like a wave. All of those who had been involved in opening the sarcophagus had been afflicted by the same restless night. A sense of dread settled over him. The sarcophagus wasn't just a relic of the past, it was a vessel, a conduit to something ancient and unknown. And now it seemed they had all been drawn into its dark embrace. The museum, once a sanctuary of history and learning, now felt like a stage set for a haunting play. The sarcophagus, its ominous centerpiece. As Charles pondered over the day's discoveries, he couldn't shake off the feeling that the events unfolding were just the beginning of something much more sinister and inexplicable. Chapter 3. The Curse Unveiled. The morning light filtered weakly through the high windows of the Hargrave Museum, casting long, sombre shadows across the ancient exhibits. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and dust, but also with a palpable sense of foreboding. Charles Hargrave and his team gathered around the sarcophagus, their attention focused on the hieroglyphs etched into the stone. Tension hung in the air as they worked tirelessly, deciphering the ancient script that had remained a mystery for millennia. The museum was silent, save for the occasional rustle of paper and the soft scratching of pencils on notepads. Then, suddenly, a breakthrough. "I've got it," exclaimed Matthew, one of the younger members of the team, his voice cutting through the stillness. The others gathered around, their eyes wide with anticipation. Matthew's hands trembled slightly as he translated the inscription aloud.
"We opened the sarcophagus, but she came for us all in the night. The last of us have reburied her in the hope we may survive. Should you find her in the future, do not open. She will come for you to maintain her life beyond life."
A heavy silence fell upon the group as the gravity of the words sunk in. They exchanged uneasy glances, each recounting their own haunting dreams from the previous night. The realization that they might have unleashed something far beyond their understanding was chilling. The day wore on, heavy with the weight of the discovery. The team worked in a daze, their minds preoccupied with the ominous warning. One by one, they left the museum as evening approached, each lost in their thoughts, the fear of the night ahead looming over them. As night enveloped the city, Charles found himself alone in his home, the haunting image of the sarcophagus burning in his mind. He tried to dismiss the fears, to rationalize what they had uncovered as mere superstition. But as sleep overtook him, he plunged once again into the nightmare that had begun to plague him. He was trapped in the sarcophagus, the darkness suffocating, the passage of time and endless torment. Then, as before, the lid was opened from outside. Charles climbed out, his heart pounding, into the ghostly burial chamber. The walls shimmered with an ethereal light, the hieroglyphs dancing before his eyes. This time, the dream took a terrifying turn. As he stepped out of the sarcophagus, he heard a blood-curdling scream. Turning towards the source, he caught just a glimpse of one of his team members, their face twisted in terror, being dragged into the dark doorway by an unseen force. The sight was so shocking, so visceral, that Charles could not move, could not scream. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, he was startled awake, his heart racing, sweat beading on his forehead. The scream still echoed in his ears, a haunting reminder of the nightmare that had felt all too real. Lying in the dark, Charles knew that they had disturbed something ancient and vengeful. The curse of the princess was no longer a legend. It was a terrifying reality that had begun to manifest, and now they were all entwined in its deadly grasp. Chapter 4. The Missing Link. The morning sun did little to dispel the gloom that had settled over the Hargrave Museum. The staff arrived in a state of weariness, their faces etched with the signs of another night, plagued by unsettling dreams. But there was a more pressing concern that morning. Andrew, the team member Charles had seen in his nightmare, was nowhere to be seen. Charles tried to shrug off his anxiety as he greeted his staff, but the absence of Andrew was like a dark cloud hanging over them. He made a few attempts to contact him, each call echoing out into the void with no response. His concern growing by the minute, Charles finally decided to call the police, his voice tinged with a sense of foreboding as he conveyed his fears. The police were initially skeptical, but the earnestness in Charles's voice and the strange circumstances surrounding the sarcophagus compelled them to act. They sent a team to Andrew's residence, a quaint house tucked away in a quiet London suburb. As the police approached the house, they noted the stillness that seemed to envelop the property. There was no sign of movement, no indication of the usual hustle and bustle of daily life. They knocked, but there was no answer. After a few tense moments, they decided to force entry. The scene that greeted them was one of chilling stillness. Andrew was found in his bed, his eyes wide open in terror, his face frozen in an expression of horror that seemed to transcend mere fear. It was as if he had seen something beyond the realm of understanding, something that had shocked his very soul into stillness. The news of Andrew's death hit the team like a physical blow. The terror that they had all been feeling, the nightmares that had plagued them, suddenly became all too real. They were no longer dealing with mere superstitions or legends. Something malevolent had been awakened with the opening of the sarcophagus, and now it was claiming them, one by one. The museum, once a place of fascination and discovery, now felt like a tomb, the sarcophagus its ominous centerpiece. The team gathered around it, their faces pale, their eyes reflecting the hair that gripped their hearts. They had unleashed something ancient and vengeful, and now they were paying the price. Charles stood amongst them, his mind racing for answers, for a way to put an end to the curse that had befallen them. But as he looked at the sarcophagus, at the serene face of the princess carved in stone, he realized they were dealing with powers that were beyond their understanding, powers as old as time itself. As night began to fall, a sense of dread settled over the museum. The shadows seemed to grow longer, the silence more oppressive. They all knew that the coming night would bring more nightmares, more terror. But what they didn't know was who would be the next to face the wrath of the princess's curse. Chapter 5. Desperate Measures. Exhausted and fraught with dread, Charles tried in vain to resist the pull of sleep, but as the night deepened, his defenses crumbled, and he succumbed to the inevitable. The dream, now a nightly terror, unfolded with horrifying predictability. This time, another member of his team was dragged towards the ominous doorway in the spectral chamber. In desperation, Charles followed, his movements hindered as if by an invisible force, his progress agonizingly slow. Reaching the entrance of the narrow corridor, he witnessed a sight that chilled him to the bone. The princess, shrouded in bandages, her movements both graceful and horrific, was dragging his colleague into the consuming darkness. In a fleeting moment, they disappeared into the void, leaving Charles in the oppressive silence of the chamber. Struggling against the unseen current, he tried to advance down the corridor, but it was like wading through a dense, resistant tide. A voice, ancient and cold, whispered through the darkness, "Your time will come," sending shivers down his spine. He awoke with a start, his heart pounding, the echo of the voice still lingering in his ears. At the museum, the atmosphere was heavy with despair and fear. The team member he had seen in his dream was absent, confirming the nightmarish reality they were all facing. "This can't be," Charles muttered in disbelief. With only 2 other team members remaining, they gathered, their expressions a mix of fear and determination to find a solution. One of the members, Sarah, suggested a desperate course of action. "Maybe we need to shut the sarcophagus up, like in the writing," she proposed, her voice tinged with a mix of hope and uncertainty. They decided to act on the idea, hoping against hope that it would break the curse. With solemn determination, they meticulously placed everything back into the sarcophagus as it was found, their movements reverent and cautious. The lid of the sarcophagus was then closed, sealing the princess once more in her ancient tomb. The finality of the action was met with a heavy silence, each of them holding their breath, half expecting some immediate sign of their fate. In a decision born of mutual fear and solidarity, they agreed to stay at the museum overnight, keeping a watchful eye on each other as they slept. They arranged makeshift beds in one of the exhibit rooms, the sarcophagus in view, its presence looming over them like a silent sentinel. As the night closed in, the museum took on a surreal quality, the shadows of the exhibits casting strange, elongated forms across the walls. The team lay in the dim light, each lost in their thoughts, the fear of sleep hanging over them like a shroud. But there was a glimmer of hope, a faint light in the darkness of their situation. Perhaps the act of sealing the sarcophagus had appeased the princess's spirit. Perhaps the nightmare was over. As they drifted into an uneasy sleep, watched over by the silent witnesses of history, they clung to this hope, praying that the dawn would bring an end to their torment. Chapter 6. The Final Confrontation. The museum was bathed in the eerie light of the moon, casting long, ominous shadows across the room, where Charles and his remaining team members sought refuge. He had taken the first watch, allowing the others to sleep. The silence of the museum was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the old building settling. Charles's eyes were fixed on the sarcophagus, its presence looming over them like a silent judge. As the hours ticked by, Charles's mind raced with thoughts of the curse, the dreams, and the fate that had befallen his colleagues. His eyes grew heavy, but he fought the pull of sleep, knowing the dangers that lurked in the shadows of their dreams. Suddenly, he noticed one of his team members, Emily, beginning to stir restlessly in her sleep. Her movements grew more frantic, her breathing laboured and panicked. Charles rushed to her side, trying to wake her, but she was lost in the throes of her nightmare. Turning to the other team member, at Daniel, Charles's heart sank as he saw him too, thrashing violently in his sleep. In a panic, Charles shook them, calling their names, trying desperately to rouse them from their nightmares, but it was too late. They both suddenly went still, their bodies collapsing lifelessly onto their makeshift beds. A chilling realization washed over Charles. He was the last one left. As he stood there, paralyzed with horror, the room began to distort and warp around him. The walls of the museum faded away, replaced by the ghostly stone walls of the burial chamber. He was no longer in the museum. He was inside the spectral chamber, the realm of the princess. The shuffling sound filled the chamber, echoing ominously off the walls. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Charles's heart pounded in his chest as he saw her, the princess, decayed, mummified, a terrifying visage of death. "It's your time now," she rasped, her voice a haunting whisper from the grave. As she shuffled towards him, Charles felt an overwhelming sense of powerlessness. But then, a glimmer of an idea sparked in his mind. The sarcophagus. It was the key. It had started this nightmare. With a surge of adrenaline, Charles rushed to the sarcophagus and grabbed the lid. He lifted it with all his strength, slammed it shut with a forceful crash. The impact echoed through the chamber, a crack appearing on the wall of the ghostly burial chamber. The princess let out a cry of pain, her form wavering. Emboldened, Charles repeated the action, lifting the lid and smashing it down upon the sarcophagus again and again. Each impact caused another crack to form in the walls of the chamber, the light from an unnatural source shining through the fissures. The princess fell to the ground, writhing in agony. "Stop!" she cried, her voice filled with pain and despair. The light from the cracks grew brighter, more intense, the chamber shaking as if it were about to collapse. Charles, driven by desperation and the will to survive, continued to smash the lid of the sarcophagus. The cracks in the walls widened, the light blinding. He could feel the grip of the curse loosening, the power of the princess waning. As the chamber crumbled around him, the light engulfing everything, Charles held onto the hope that this nightmare would finally end, that the curse of the princess would be broken once and for all. With one final resounding crash, the sarcophagus shattered and the light exploded, enveloping Charles in its blinding embrace. The walls of the ghostly burial chamber crumbled around Charles, the very fabric of the spectral dimensions unraveling. The princess, who had once been a figure of terror, now lay defeated on the floor, her mummified body, a symbol of an ancient and relentless curse, began to disintegrate, turning into the dust of centuries past. As her form faded, the oppressive aura that had enveloped the chamber dissipated, a sense of finality hanging in the air. In an instant, the world shifted around Charles. The phantom chamber vanished, replaced by the familiar surroundings of the Hargrave Museum. He was back, the nightmare seemingly over. His eyes turned to the sarcophagus, now a shattered relic. Inside, where the princess had once laid in eternal rest, was nothing but dust. The ancient curse born from her restless spirit had been broken, its hold on the living world severed. But the victory was bittersweet. Charles's gaze fell upon his two fallen team members, Emily and Daniel. They lay motionless, their faces still etched with the terror of their final moments. A deep sadness washed over Charles, the weight of his inability to save them heavy on his heart. They were victims of a curse that had extended its malevolent reach across time, claiming those who dared to disturb the princess's rest. As he stood there, amidst the remnants of the ordeal, Charles reflected on the events that had unfolded. The sarcophagus, an artifact of immense historical significance, had also been a vessel of untold power. It had not just been a tomb for the princess, but a conduit for her spirit, a bridge between the worlds of the living and the dead. In their quest for knowledge and discovery, they had unwittingly unleashed an ancient force, one that demanded a high price for its disturbance. The curse of the princess was a testament to the mysteries and powers that lay hidden in the artifacts of the past. It was a reminder that some things, shrouded in the sands of time, are meant to remain undisturbed. The sarcophagus had held not just the remains of an ancient princess, but a legacy of her unfulfilled destiny, her rage against the passage of time, and the loss of her kingdom. In the aftermath, the Hargrave Museum became a place of solemn reflection. The sarcophagus, now a pile of rubble and dust, served as a poignant reminder of the ordeal they had endured and the lives that were lost. Charles, forever changed by the experience, dedicated himself to honoring the memory of his colleagues, ensuring that their sacrifice would not be in vain. As the sun rose over London, casting its light on the museum, Charles knew that the world of ancient artifacts would always be shrouded in mystery and wonder, but he also understood the need for respect and caution when delving into the secrets of the past. The curse of the princess had been broken, but its lessons would live on. A whisper in the halls of the Hargrave Museum, a reminder of the thin veil that separates the living from the echoes of history.
And if you're still looking to fulfill your thirst for more horror, don't forget to check out this next video, unless of course you are frozen with fear already.